Now available as paperback and e-reader from the author of Spinsterella, A Strange and Unusual Romance, and Spellbound, A Darker Shade of Black comes from Legendary Magazine. And you get the conclusion to the Spinsterella trilogy in paperback and e-readers at online booksellers today. When you look at President Donald Trump and President Barack Obama, they may appear to be two different ethnicities and two different presidents from two different parties, but they are the exact same person because when you look at Donald Trump and Barack Obama, they're both playing from the same playbook, even though they're from different parties. And I can see the eerie parallels between Barack Obama and Donald Trump by their actions. And the first action that your Donald Trump has made that made me look at him in the same way I see Barack Obama is his whole desperation to get this tax cut pushed through. Because this tax cut, or tax reform as he has pushed it as, is just Obamacare all over again. And anyone who can take an objective look at this whole tax cut plan can see that it eerily mirrors the disaster we got with the Affordable Care Act. Because the Affordable Care Act back in 2009 was a rushed, put together bill that no one knew or understood about. And the Republicans back then were complaining that the bill was rushed, it was sloppily put together, and that it desperately needed more time to be taken a look at. However, these same Republicans who complained about the Affordable Care Act of 2009 are so eager to push through tax reform, which is really just a deal for the wealthy, and this bill is eerily just as damaging to America, the same way the Affordable Care Act of 2009 was damaging to the American economy. Because when we look at that Affordable Care Act of 2009, yes, it mandated that everyone was supposed to have health care. However, that health care bill, it put a lot of costs on small businesses and gave small businesses less incentive to go out here and hire full-time workers, because if they hired full-time workers, they had to find a way to pay for their health care. And when I look at this tax reform bill of 2017, I see the same parallels between that tax cut bill and the Affordable Care Act. And this tax cut bill gives the wealthy lots of different tax breaks. However, it makes middle class people pay more taxes. So I look at the big picture as it relates to this tax reform bill that Donald Trump is pushing through, and it's just as damaging to the American people as the Affordable Care Act of 2009. We have another rushed, slapped together piece of legislation, all designed more for the legacy of Donald Trump, in the same way that the Affordable Care Act was all about the legacy of Barack Obama. Both of these men put their legacies above the needs of the American people and made no real effort to try to help the American people with their legislation or their presidential policies. It was more about their ego, not helping out the average American. How does raising taxes on the middle class make America great again? That's a question I would like to ask Donald Trump, because when I look at this tax reform bill that's supposed to raise the work taxes of working class people, how does that make America great again? And how does giving tax breaks to billionaires and millionaires make America great again, when we did this back in the 1980s and Ronald Reagan called it trickle-down economics? However, not much trickled down to the average American. When it comes down to these whole schemes, they don't help anyone. They're just something that are more about ego and legacy, but they're not about helping meet the needs of the American people. So when I look at your Donald Trump, I just see a white version of Barack Obama, someone who polarizes people based on emotion, but does not have any real knowledge of how to legislate or how to run the executive branch of the United States. Someone who has no leadership skills, and someone who does not know how to create diplomacy in foreign affairs. He is just as grossly unqualified for the presidency as Barack Obama, and both men are clearly showing me through their legislation and their policies that neither one really has a direction for the country, because this tax reform bill is the Obamacare of Donald Trump, and it is just the same as Obamacare in that it's going to do damage to the American economy, and it's going to devastatingly impact the American people. Unfortunately, too many Americans are caught up in their emotions about Donald Trump to see the damage that this Republican policy is going to do to them long term. And just like the many people were so caught up in their emotions about Obamacare that they weren't thinking about the long term damage that piece of legislation did to the overall American economy. When it comes down to the American economy, sadly, it doesn't seem like most Americans are concerned about their country, and that eerily reminds me of what happened with the Roman Empire. Because when the Roman Empire, in its last days, many of the people had become apathetic, they had become complacent, and they really had become indifferent about their country because they had taken life in their country for granted, and everything started to deteriorate because what they did was they took their lives for granted, and then they elected leaders who weren't looking out for their needs. They were just looking out for their own needs and making themselves rich at the expense of their own people. And that's what led to the decline of Rome. And I see the eerie parallels between what's happening with the last couple of presidents and the decline of the Roman Empire. And when I look at Donald Trump's tax plan and Barack Obama's Affordable Care Act, I see the same disasters that led to the collapse of Rome. And these are things that most people aren't concerned about because they don't want to take a look at the bigger picture of America and compare it to other countries in American history, because just like the Romans, they think they live in the greatest land and they think that it's going to go on forever. And this hubris is going to lead to a major humbling of America, I believe, because most Americans, again, are taking their lives for granted, and they're taking things for granted to the point where they're not holding the people who they put in charge accountable. The big problem with most Americans is that they don't understand their Constitution, and that we, the people, need to start taking charge of our country, because when it looks like to me, things aren't going to get great again if you have to keep paying more taxes and you're a working class person. And when I look at these so-called tax breaks for the rich, all this money, just like it did in the 80s, is just going to go out into offshore accounts and be part of helping wealthy companies and billionaires get more wealthy at the expense of the average working individual. If you'd like to see me make more videos like this, you can donate to my Patreon by clicking the link in the description box. And if you want to try some of my SJS Direct publications, you may do so by clicking the link to Amazon.com. That's all I have to say for this video. You can comment, rate, and subscribe.